It'd be very easy to fall into that thing of feeling like you had no friends and that it was everyone else's fault and life was unfair, but that's not going to do you any favours.
I used to go to parks and hang out and try and talk to the mums, and I hadn't anticipated that amount of loneliness.
There's still periods where you just, come home from work and, being alone, you think, well, where's the motivation to cook anything healthy? Where's the motivation to do this?
So this word lonely became a word that he actually would, say to everybody. Instead of when people said, how are you? Instead of him saying, I don't feel well, I'm not having a good day, he would say, I feel lonely.
Welcome to Chorus Voices, the podcast brought to you by Chorus, a fresh approach to community service. Settle in, listen in, and enjoy the voices who bring you reflections, musings, and stories from our community.
Hello and welcome to the first episode in a special series of Chorus Voices. I'm Lou Forster, Head of Brand and People here at Chorus. Do you ever feel lonely? Almost 28% of Australians say they feel lonely at least 3 days every week, and 1/5 of us say we rarely or never feel we have someone to turn to for help. That's according to a study by Melbourne's Swinburne University and the Australian Psychological Society, released in November 2018. The study also found only 30% of Australians say they never feel lonely. So loneliness is something most of us grapple with at one time or another in our lives. And at the beginning of 2019, I started talking to Australians about their experiences with loneliness, about its causes, symptoms, and importantly, its solutions. We invited people to share their experiences and were overwhelmed by the response we had. Some amazing people came forward to share their stories. You're going to hear from some of them over the next 3 episodes. Maybe their stories will resonate with you. Maybe they will inspire you to make a change in your own life. They'll certainly help you look at loneliness with fresh eyes. But first, let's ask a seemingly obvious question. What is loneliness?
So loneliness is also considered a form of social isolation. So it's a way in which we don't feel connected to others. So if we go back to kind of early days, there's a lot of theories in place that we are social creatures, that we need social interaction as a form of protection and security. So our brain naturally still seeks that out. And so when we don't feel connected to people, that's when often we feel lonely.
Abby Remmelkamp is a psychologist with 20 years' experience in therapy. She knows a thing or two about what loneliness is and how it's treated. I asked her what happens to our minds and our bodies when we feel lonely.
There's chemical changes that occur in our brain when we feel happy and when we're connected with people. So there's a chemical in the brain called dopamine. And so when we feel connected, that's released. And that's like kind of a happy chemical. When we don't have dopamine and when we feel perhaps disconnected from people, it's a similar kind of response to, say, when you're stressed. So it produces a chemical called cortisol. And it's kind of like the fight or flight response. And the brain's a really powerful thing because the cortisol indicates to us that actually we need to get connected again. We need to seek out some social interaction. And so it serves a purpose for us. But the downside of that is if we don't actually act on it, the cortisol increases and it therefore can turn into more chronic conditions such as stress, depression and anxiety. So when all of this happens, it can really start to impact our bodies. So we'll find that motivation drops and our energy lessens. We can't sleep well and we might be more susceptible to colds and illnesses and heart conditions. So what's also interesting and what I'm a big believer in is around our mindset and our thinking. So once loneliness kind of sits in and kicks in, some of our thinking can be quite disruptive or irrational. And when we don't get a handle on that, the irrational thoughts can get bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's quite difficult to kind of rein it back in.
Abby, are there any predictors of loneliness?
Yeah, so similar to resilience and stress, we have different tolerances to loneliness. So these will be determined by our life events or our upbringing, our self-talk that I mentioned before. And research also suggests that there's other factors such as ageing, grief and loss, so losing a loved one or a close friend. We know that loneliness can kick in when our health and our mobility changes and change in our living situation. So we can be moving overseas or away from our community, away from our family, moving into aged care, etc. So those are some of the predicting factors. Other things such as personality as well. So what's interesting is that some of us will feel, can be in crowds of people and have a very busy social life. And from the outside or from other people looking in, we can think, wow, there's no way that person can be lonely. But if they don't feel a certain connection to people, or a meaningful connection, then they're going to still feel lonely. So likewise, with personality, there's an introverted personality. I'm an introvert, and I get a lot of energy from just kind of having a bit of quiet time. But as I was saying before, with the brain changes, that can be something that triggers me to say, hang on, you've had a little bit of enough lone time. It's time that you start connecting with people.
Loneliness can affect us both physically and mentally. It can contribute to depression and suicide, to cardiovascular disease, and to the risk of stroke. It can decrease our memory and contribute to antisocial behaviour. It can lead us to make poor decisions and lead to destructive alcohol and drug use. It doesn't always, but it can. Loneliness is a serious epidemic in our society. Let's hear from some people who volunteered to share their stories about feeling lonely and find out what loneliness is for them.
My name's Warren. I live and work in WA, 53, got 5 children, enjoy my job. Also do a bit of study, obviously, to keep myself busy, keep the mind working, and was happy to come along and explain, I guess, some of the situation I've been in and how I find this subject. It's not something you think about all the time, but it's something you certainly acknowledge that you go through that. So I've been by myself, married, separated 3 years in this April. So probably half of that I was living by myself, and that was my second marriage, so I'd pretty much been with a partner since I was 21. So a long time, 2 marriages, not back to back as such, but a long period of time there. And then my eldest wanted to come and live with me, which he did, yep. And then he buggered off for 5 months to go and do a bit of travel overseas, so you're back to by yourself. But having said that, even him being at my place, there's still periods where you just, come home from work and, being alone, you think, well, where's the motivation to cook anything healthy? Where's the motivation to do this? I'm doing uni, so given when the semesters are happening, there's a lot of study, a lot of reading, you're probably in a bit more of a routine, but I'm pretty good at managing my time, so I get that out of the way. But then you do realise there's lots of times when you just, you go, well, it'd be nice to have people to talk to, companionship. You do, you realise that you're using your phone, as I said before, as a portal to avoid isolation, even if it's just, like we're saying, reading stuff on there, but, not chatting with people as such.
We'll revisit the impact of social media on loneliness later in the episode. Loneliness is often sparked by a change in life circumstances. A marriage breakup is a common trigger for either partner to start feeling lonely, because it's common to lose part of your social group, your social life, when relationships break down. One study puts Warren in a prime category for loneliness. 40% of single male parents reported feeling lonely. Warren says he often feels socially isolated and he finds himself withdrawing from human interaction. It's a common problem and one exacerbated by the way modern society operates. It's entirely possible to go all day without having a meaningful interaction with your fellow human beings, even when you've left the house and been surrounded by people. For example, using the self-checkout at the supermarket, or as Warren points out, keeping your headphones in at the gym.
Well, I think, you get to an age where you sort of understand yourself a little bit better, and you can be extroverted in a work environment, but I'm quite introverted away from that work, where you do go to networking functions. I don't have a problem with going to them, but it doesn't always mean you feel comfortable. And sometimes you can just go there with an exit plan. Okay, well, I'm going to keep an eye on my watch and go, which is probably the wrong way to do it. But look, I think it's just part of that mindset where it's easy to start feeling, if you're lonely, everything's against you. I've been on medication from a depression point of view for 12 years. Not a high dose, but I've been on that. I catch up with my GP regular just to make sure how that's going. I'll try and make a point of going out and walking or going to the gym recently and doing stuff because exercise is good.
And the outdoors are really helpful.
But even in the gym, you got headphones in, and you're just focused on what you're doing, and every machine's got a television on. You don't have to look anywhere else. So even you might be doing these things that sound like you're active, but you're not. No conversations. You've left the house for an hour, you've come back. Shopping's the same. All those things that we have to do and need to do. So I just find that I guess it's more pervasive than you think. When you think about it, that's, I guess, from my point of view, we go, well, it's not just sitting at home and you're watching Netflix. It's, and then I go to work and I'm sitting in an office. I'm a general manager, so no one's going to come near me anyway. They're trying to avoid me. So even got the door open, but you go from a home isolation to being isolated at work, sitting in your car in traffic, you're isolated, and all those type of things. So I am very conscious of how much time you spend alone. And like evenings are the worst for me, and I notice my moods change.
Yeah.
And you can become bitter over things. I certainly notice that. That's why I'm conscious of, I've got to have some way of dealing with it, because I'll quite often. My young bloke might come home at, say, 8:30, 9 o'clock, he's been caught up with his mates for a beer, and I've been sitting at home for, say, 2 or 3 hours and might have been reading something or watching something or whatever it is. I struggle to have a conversation because I've worked my...
Kind of close yourself off
a
bit, yeah.
Yeah, and I know I can feel I have, because it's, not that you didn't get an invite or whatever, but, it's just how you feel wronged. How come other people are enjoying themselves and I'm stuck here?
During our chat, Warren referred to himself as an introvert. I think many of us have this idea of an introvert as being someone who is shy in public, but it's more complicated than that. An introvert may well enjoy being out in public, even being the life of the party, but they can find that tiring. What recharges their batteries is often quiet time, alone. So introverts should love being alone, right? Let's not get too deep into the weeds of psychology here, but a 2018 study found no evidence that introverts actually enjoyed their solitude more than extroverts. The study, yet to be peer-reviewed, suggested how it feels to be alone. And that might be a function of how individuals self-regulate experiences and behaviours more generally, rather than merely based on introversion or avoidance of others. In other words, for some people, loneliness could be about failing to make connections with other people rather than choosing not to make those connections.
Hi, my name is Duke. I live in Northbridge. I'm an academic and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. I think there are maybe different kinds of loneliness. I think if many of us just stopped in the middle of our busy lives, you might think that, what else is my life about? How do I feel connected with other people? I think for me, loneliness is mostly a lack of sense of connection, at least. Maybe you are connected to others, but there are moments when you feel that the connection is not as strong, maybe, or it's not the kind of connection that you're needing at the time. So you might have a lot of friends, but then you might think, I'm feeling like, not enjoying being single at the moment. I guess that's sometimes the main kind of loneliness I feel.
When connection is working for you, what does that look like?
Yeah. It could be something as simple as having a good conversation with a friend. You feel like you're on the same page. You're both in agreement, or it's sort of like you're on the same wavelength. You're both laughing, like enjoying the same thing, doing the same activity.
Duke came to Australia from Vietnam with her parents when she was 18 months old. She's an only child. Her parents have divorced. She holds a PhD in English literature, reads a lot, and calls herself a Facebook addict. She's currently single. Like Warren, Duke calls herself an introvert, so she often finds herself holding back from experiences, declining invitations, and sitting on the sidelines instead of taking part in the fun. In other words, she's self-regulating her experiences and behaviours.
If you're an introvert, even though you might get along with people and you might be more sociable, I mean, as I get older, I feel like I am more sociable and I enjoy being around people. But at the end of the day, I do need my alone time. And that's not loneliness. It's just like recharging your batteries, I suppose. Like, I guess there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Sometimes respite from the world is a good thing. You need to just focus on yourself. And yeah, being single is quite often a good thing because you can find out more about yourself when you're not with someone. I mean, I know people who've never been single for more than a few weeks in their adult lives, and they just fall apart when they break up. It's just like, I could see them coming off the rails, or they have to find someone immediately, and it's like, what is this fear? It's maybe a fear of loneliness. And
I was just thinking that. I was thinking, because I talked to a couple of people about, what are possible predictors of loneliness, and I reckon that's one. If you've always gone from relationship to relationship, and there's dependence perhaps in those as well, that's a possible predictor, because if at any point that relationship or one of those ends, it's you haven't learned to be yourself and know yourself.
Self-reliant, independent.
There's definitely something about the self. We started talking about that before we recorded. I think there's something about identity and being comfortable and knowing yourself. And because you talked about, being alone is different to being lonely. And I think if you're an introvert, I think I'm both, but I definitely need alone time. But like you said, it's like a spectrum. At some point, maybe too much starts to get unhealthy, and or you then feel the need to reconnect, and if for whatever reason that's not there, then that's when the loneliness kicks in. Not everyone who experiences loneliness has self-regulated their experiences and behaviours. Others have felt their friends and family pull away from them instead. Brett Osler is from Victoria and lives in Perth. He's interested in sports and travel, and in 2014 he went on the trip of a lifetime to the FIFA World Cup in Brazil. While he was there, he went on a trip up the Amazon and he was bitten by a tick, and it was a moment that would change his life forever. Brett is living with chronic fatigue syndrome.
I just thought it had been attached for a little bit of time and all the rest of it, but I'd made it clear that it had been attached for a while, and just a few other little things, and then also found out that a person that had been on that trip had got brain cancer as well, so there's a pretty strong connection between this illness and brain cancer as well. So, but
at the time you just thought it's just it's a tick.
Just a tick, and took it off incorrectly, and now I know better. And then I got really ill a couple of weeks later, but different country. My roommate had also been ill, but I slept 44 out of 48 hours.
Wow.
What's termed as a summer flu now, and was termed back then, but now that I know better, that was a post-bite symptom that should have alerted me to the fact. But I'd done all the smart traveller advice, and nothing mentioned about ticks on there. And even if you look at some of the other countries around the world where it's Lyme disease is quite profound, the Australian government doesn't always provide the advice on the Smart Traveller website.
There's definitely a whole weird thing with Lyme disease anyway, isn't it? In the understanding of belief of whatever it is.
Yeah, there's two groups of infectious diseases specialists, those that believe in it and those that don't really believe in it. And those, when I say don't believe in it, they've got patents on testing and vaccines, which it's been proven that you can't vaccinate against Lyme disease. It's a spirochete. Syphilis is also a spirochete, and you can't vaccinate against that. So
is a spirochete the type of illness?
Yeah, it's a bacteria itself. So it's basically just a corkscrew thing, and that's how it propels itself through the body and tissues and organs.
Brett's medical journey has been harrowing. The infections he's experienced have been complicated and worsened by several operations. They've affected his ability to work and to play sport, and the whole situation's been made difficult to maintain friendships. And adding to the problem, Brett's family are pretty much all on the other side of the country. His condition's not one people readily understand, and people started withdrawing from him. I'll let Brett explain what it was like, starting with the reactions of his colleagues at work.
It was pretty hard. People know that you're going off to all these appointments and you're making up time for the time that you're taking off for your medical appointments, and then you're getting to the point that you're not giving them an answer as to why, or the symptoms are changing. So it was in the hip, and then it's in the shoulder, and it's in the knee, and then the cognitive, that came and went, and just people couldn't comprehend that it was a moving beast, and then sort of started feeling a bit isolated in the workplace, and I was getting temperature intolerance throughout the day, so then I was needing a fan in the afternoon, and then one of my work colleagues, who's pretty observant, goes, "Well, you notice at this time every day you're turning the fan on." So he was then providing me some medical feedback that I could take back to my doctors as well. So
he sounds like he was supportive in his own way.
He was, but others weren't, and sort of moved from the area that I was sitting, or that we were sitting in, and a lot of people that I used to go out socialising with, that started disappearing, and then also my ability to go out, and I'd go out with friends dancing, and I'd be sort of 30 minutes in, and I've got to go home. Pains just increased massively, and can't deal with this, and noise sensitivity and light sensitivity. So I've had all of those, and fortunately I don't suffer it as much anymore, but occasionally I might be out for a meal and having something to eat, and you can just hear someone eating with their mouth open, and that littlest things sort of set you off. So yeah, it's not pleasant.
Where are you from originally, family-wise? Is WA or
Victoria.
So have you contemplated moving back to Victoria in the last couple of years?
I have contemplated, but my medical care is here, so there would be benefits, because then I wouldn't have to pay rent and all those other things. I'd have my family support network and that, but again, that's a double-edged sword, because some family are really good and some aren't so good, and you find that pretty common amongst people dealing with this illness, because some family members totally understand and trust in your account of things, and others just can't comprehend what's going on. And my mum has been there for people that in the family or in our immediate network of people for cancers and strokes and those sorts of things, and she works in similar services. She just can't comprehend what I'm dealing with, and I've got to the point of sending her scientific publications so that she can have a read. And the last time I spoke to her was Christmas, and I asked her if she'd read what I'd sent her a few weeks earlier, and she'd been too busy to read it, which, it doesn't say that there's much there for the support. But fortunately, my younger sister does get it, and she's been really supportive. But she's doing her tertiary. She's nearly 17 years younger than me, so I've sort of been there for most of her upbringing, and then now she's returning the favour. But yeah, she's got her tertiary education, and two kids that she needs to look after as well. So looking after her bigger brother's not really high on her or shouldn't be high on her priority, but she has been fantastic. She's just been an absolute rock for me, and just having that connection every so often via FaceTime or Snapchat or whatever. And she's by no means in a position to really help financially, but occasionally she's helped financially to, knowing that she'll get it back. But there's periods where I wasn't getting paid by the insurer, or needed a quick loan when I was overseas because certain things didn't work out.
We'll talk more about the empathy of other people and its impact on our feelings of loneliness in the next episode in this series. But something I found interesting in what Brett said was his use of social media. Brett uses FaceTime to talk to his sister and play with his nieces. He said Snapchat has been fantastic because it allows someone to record a little message and you can view it later. We hear a lot that's negative about these platforms, and there's even been research to suggest using them makes us feel more lonely. But I think there can be an opportunity to make connections too. It's certainly not black and white. And with the evolution of technology and how we're using it, it's ever changing. Before we go for today, let's have a listen to some ways to combat loneliness. Here's Abby Rabonkamp again with some helpful advice.
There's some fantastic resources available. There's Headspace, which has got a lot of tips and resources and practical suggestions, the same with Beyond Blue. But one of the things that we talk about in therapy, and obviously I see a lot of people with stress and depression and loneliness as a factor as well, and people often, I'll ask them to think about what are your thoughts and what are some of the things that you say to yourself about your current situation. And so I ask them to keep a bit of a diary, a thought diary. And what we often find is people have thoughts such as, the person's only asking me to do something because they feel sorry for me, or I'm not good at anything, therefore I can't actually join a social group. Some might actually say to themselves, I don't have time or the energy to actually catch up and connect with people. So when people come back with some of these thoughts, we talk them through and we look at what are the payoffs for this thinking. And often people will say, what do you mean the payoffs of these thinking? And often the payoff is it actually means I don't actually have to try. I don't actually have to get out of there and give it a go and make an effort. But there's a lot of costs of having these irrational and kind of negative thinking as well. So talking it through with someone's obviously incredibly important, and looking at how we can actually shift some of their negative thoughts into the ones that are more motivating and proactive. Another thing is there's research that indicates that it's actually impossible to feel lonely when you're being of service to other people. So when you are doing something for someone else, you're helping them in some way, and they're feeling a sense of gratitude for your contribution, then it's impossible for you to feel lonely in those moments. So I guess one of the things and a practical tip that people can do if they are feeling lonely is looking at how they can volunteer and help someone else who's in need. That's a practical strategy. Other things that I'd recommend to people is to do a bit of mindfulness. Mindfulness is a bit of a popular thing at the moment, but there's a lot of research again and evidence to support that when we calm our mind and when we get control over some of our thinking and we focus on the present moment, it brings us back into the present space rather than thinking in the past, which promotes depression, or thinking far too forward in the future, which actually promotes anxiety. So learning to calm the mind and be present, paying attention to what's around you, what are you hearing, what are you seeing, what are you smelling, your body, feel sensations, those sort of things can be really helpful. And one of a very useful meditation is one that we use, and my husband will do it daily. It's called the Wheel of Awareness, which is by Dan Siegel. And it's a 25-minute meditation, but it's really helpful in kind of connecting the body and the mind. And helping you to connect with other people as well.
Well, that's been part 1 of our 3-part series on loneliness. Next time, we'll look at some of the key groups in our society at risk of experiencing loneliness, including seniors and migrants. Thanks so much for joining us, and I look forward to sharing these stories in more depth with you in part 2 of the Chorus Voices special series on loneliness. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Chorus Voices, the podcast brought to you by Chorus. If you like our show and wanted to know more, check out our website at chorus.org.au. And please leave a review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and it helps others find us and enjoy the podcast as well. Join us next time for more inspiring stories and news from our community. Chorus, a fresh approach to community service.